It's my pleasure to welcome you to this joint webinar between Jubilee Centre and Salux. Europe is being confronted since the Russian invasion of Ukraine with significant armed conflict inside territorial Europe for the first time for decades. This has provoked a much greater awareness of military preparedness within Europe, and with the accession of Donald Trump to power in the US, has prompted the need for Europe to confront its, in many ways, lack of military preparedness, its underinvestment in the defense industry. And so a number of countries are now planning to raise significant military expenditure. There was talk of conscription being reintroduced in a number of countries in Europe. And so it's a particularly apt time for us to hold a webinar with our guest speaker, Colonel François-Régis Legrier, who is a retired colonel after 30 or so years in the French military. He's written a book for Salux on just war theory, the English title of which is "If You Want Peace, Prepare for War." That's on the Salux website. You can buy it there. But he's going to speak on the topic for around 30 minutes, and then we'll have questions and answer session after that. So if you'd like to put questions into the chat facility as we go along, please do so. Just as a reminder, this presentation is being recorded and will be shown, or there will be a link to it afterwards on the Salux and Jubilee Centre website. Welcome, Colonel. Please begin.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much to Salux, Christian, and the Jubilee Centre. Thank you, Ruben, for your invitation to speak this evening about the just war theory, and to give precise a little bit my career. I would like to add I served in the French Army during 31 years. I joined the Military Academy of Saint-Cyr in 1993, and after 3 years, I chose the artillery branch. And in my career, there is an operational part with several commitments in our NATO operations. I think to the Kosovo in 2001, the Afghanistan 2007, but also French national operation in Africa, Chad, in 2012, and the last one was in Iraq, and I commanded the French artillery battalion, French artillery detachment, which was embedded with the US-led coalition against Daesh. And the last fighting in 2018, 2019 in the northeastern Syria, in the Aegean pocket. And my job was to provide fire support to the Syrian Democratic Forces and the US Special Forces deployed in the northeastern Syria theater. And after this operation, I have written a paper in the famous French National Defense Review. Paper whose title was the Aegean victory. Aegean is a victory, and it was a paper to criticize the way of making war of the Americans, especially the United States, but Western countries, using using airstrikes and the remote war, uh, uh, but but without doing nothing do nothing to about the population, and especially the flow of population trying to escape to the combat to the fighting area across the desert during the winter. And so this article was badly received by my hierarchy, but I think it was very coherent with the book I have written a few months before, whose title is If You Want Peace, Prepare for War. The next slide, please. So I have written this book in 2018, so about 1 year after, before my commitment in Iraq. So in the French on the left part, Si tu veux la paix, prépare la guerre. And this book has been translated and published by Salus in 2023. And when people ask me why did you did you write this book? I used to answer that I wrote the book I would have liked to read when I was at the war college, because really in the Western war colleges we study the military techniques, the logistics, the planification of the operations, uh, a little bit, but a very little bit, the law of war, but you have nothing about the use at bellum. That is to say, the right to make war. And this is a political question. And in this book, I am looking forward to answer and to try to understand if this famous use at bellum is relevant, and why in our democracies from the end of the Second World War, um, we used the theme of justice, perhaps in a bad way, and I think we will speak about that in the presentation. The next, please. During 30 minutes, I propose to share with you my reflections about 4 points. The first will be about the main theaters of modern wars. Uh, it's interesting to study that because we will see that there is we can compare there is a comparison we can do between these modern wars and the war in antiquity. In the second point, we will ask the question: is war more evil? It's a very important question because during my career, I met a lot of officers, soldiers, especially Christian officers or Christian soldiers, thinking that war was more evil, and so it was a very difficult for the conscience to do this job. In the same time, we will see the just war theory, the just war doctrine, especially by Saint Thomas Aquinas at the Middle Age, and we conclude with the part about nuclear weapons and more especially the nuclear deterrence and the position of the Catholic Church. So next, please. So to to speak quickly about the main features of modern wars, I would like to insist on the main theme of the Western countries. The first division is that of our technological superiority conceived as the unsurpassable horizon of war. I think it's a mistake. Now, perhaps it is finished, and we will start with European conflict. But during 30 years, about 30 years, we used all this technological superiority and the remote warfare, thinking that it was enough to win war, and we made a confusion between the tactical success in the ground, on the ground, and which is a military problem, a military topic, and winning the war, which is a political problem. The second illusion is that we have thought of war from a messianic perspective. This is the story. Uh, we think we thought the world as a kind of crusade, supposed to create democracy and basically universal peace. Uh, I think it's also in our and you could to think like that. But yeah, you have also another examples. And we I think the Islamic reason was the purpose is to spread the religion, for example, and the consequence of this type of Muslim war is you have to demonize the enemy and you introduce Manichaeism in the world, and especially in the public opinion. And this Manichaeism, this that causes calls that the emotional hostility between two or three public opinion. Yeah, this emotional hostility has become the fuel for modern conflicts. And the last point of the main features of modern wars is that the modern wars are a total war with the more or less, of course, more or less, but the disappearance of the law of war. And just some points. Uh, Today, you have neither religion nor morality and no law playing a role to regulate the war, the difference of the wars before the French Revolution in Europe and in the Middle Age. The distinction between combatants and non-combatants is very difficult. Um, this is the same for civilian and military objectives. For example, I've seen that yeah, in Iraq and in the northeastern Syria, but it is more or less the same in the Middle East. But for example, hospitals are used to stock uh, to stock weapons or to put for command posts or to military assets. So okay, so it becomes an hospital is a civilian objective, but it becomes a military objective when it is used like that. The distinction between combatant and non-combatants is very difficult when you have, for example, civilian people needing for information with a mobile phone to the combatants and so on and so on. Okay. Last point is that the war is spreading in all domains. So the British Army and the US Army call that the multi-domain operations. It means that the war is also an economic one, cyber, cognitive one, and in this type of war, of course, we need to underline the essential role of propaganda in this information is a war, and you can you can uh, I can tell you that this information is not only a prerogative of the authoritarian regime like Russia, but the country, of course, uses this type of action. The next, please.
Colonel?
Yeah.
The sound isn't very well. Maybe could you take off your headset as well, and maybe that improves the sound, and use a different microphone, maybe. Is that possible?
It's better like it is better like that?
I think so. Yes. Next slide.
Okay. Yes, in this slide, I would like to insist on the great similarity between modern warfare and war in antiquity. I would like to remind you of the destruction of Carthage in 146 before Christ, at the end of the Third Punic War. You know, you remember the Cato the Mario in front of the Roman Senate, saying that delenda Carthago, that is to say, we have to destroy Carthago. Okay, Carthago, which was a rival of Rome. This city, located in Africa, in the north of Africa, was raised to the ground after 3 years of siege, and Carthago is an example of a total war, an existential war that mobilizes everyone, men, women, child, and slaves. This is also a good example of the real war economy, with all the assets, all the resources of the city are oriented towards the defense of the city and the production of armaments. Um, it is a very interesting example. And if I give you this example, is to remind you that during the antiquity, most of wars were total war. That is to say that there was no difference between combatants and non-combatants. And at the end of this war, of the Carthago was totally destroyed by fire, as you can see on the right picture in the slide. And um, to, to, we have to wait for the French Revolution to assist to this type of war with mobilization of the civilians. Uh, and after that, in the 19th century, the industrialization of war, and the war we know that the First World War and Second World War, we try, of course, total war. Next slide, please. So I would like to, about the modern warfare, I would like to insist on the visionary role of the papacy at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, because it is not very well known, and I think it is important to know. Uh, about war, the Catholic Church is the only institution to have foreseen the apocalyptic nature of modern warfare at the dawn of the 20th century. And I would like to remind you this address of the Pope Leo XIII, who declared in 1899, "For while fighting with arms may sometimes be necessary, it is never without an enormous amount of calamity." And how much greater will these calamities be with the immensity of today's armies, with the great advances in military science, with the ever-increasing devices of death. Okay, Leo XIII, when he declared this sentence, it is the end of the 19th century, the end of the Napoleon Wars, devastating Europe. Okay, and at the beginning of the 20th, the 2 August 14, the day of the great pardon of Assisi, St. Pius X, roughly 18 days to life, published his exhortation to the Catholics of the world and to a world gripped by murderous madness. The Pope uttered a supreme and prophetic cry: Europe is being dragged almost eternally to the disastrous war which cannot contemplate its perils, its carnage, and its consequences without being filled with pain and horror. Our souls are torn apart by it. It's very strong, it's very prophetic, and for the story, when the ambassador of the Austrian Empire uh, uh, wants to ask to the Pope to bless the weapons of the Catholic Austrian Empire, Saint Pius X refused to bless the weapons. And it is interesting because during the Middle Age and the Christian Europe, it was common to ask to the Pope or the priest to bless the weapons. So it is, I think, a change very important. The next, please. So the second part is a question: Is war a moral evil? It's very, of course, an important question when you are a Christian, and especially when you are a Christian soldier or officer, to be sure or to have a right answer about this question. I would like to remind you the triple manifestation described, or triple manifestation of evil described by Vladimir Soloviev. Vladimir Soloviev is a Russian writer of the 19th century, end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And he had written a remarkable book, War Progress, and the end of this story, three conversations. I advise you to read this book. It is very, very important, and I speak about this book in my own book because what Soloviev describes is today current, I think, to the demonization of the enemy. It is you find that in Soloviev. It is very interesting. So Soloviev describes the triple manifestation of evil at the individual level when a man commits a murder against another man, at the social level when a social class oppresses another one, and the third level when political level when a nation makes war to another nation to be more powerful to destroy the small nation and so on. And for okay, this is an evil, but for Christians, the real question is war systematically a moral evil? The next, please. Of course, you have on the Bible some elements which could justify that war is systematically a moral evil. I think to the sixth commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," but you have also this sentence of Matthew, I tell you not to resist the wicked, or also those who strike with the sword shall perish with the sword. So you have in the story of the Christianism, pacifism streaming based on the Bible and especially on these sentences. But you have also a mix of the Bible and Rousseau's philosophy, saying that man is good by nature, and the belief that the use of force is necessary wrong is necessarily a moral problem and moral evil. And we have an example of this type of thinking, of this way of thinking, with about the use of force without force in the UN peacekeeping operation. And I don't have time to tell you the story of the Bosnian the peacekeeping operation in Bosnia, for example, at the beginning of the 90s. But it is very, very interesting to understand this philosophy, this way of thinking, consisting in using of force without force. So it's very contradictory, but it was a reality at the era. The next, please. So you have also the trying to answer to this question. The question is killing in war morally acceptable for a Christian. You have, of course, another elements allowing to answer positively. I think to Saint John the Baptist saying to the soldiers ask him, what should we do? Okay, and Saint John the Baptist answers, do not extort or defraud anyone and be content with your pay. Okay, Saint John Baptist doesn't say to the soldiers to leave, to stop their job and to become I don't know politicians or another job, but he says be content with your pay. And you have also this famous sentence of the Christ, okay, about the Roman centurion. I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. Okay, so there's the same as the Christ doesn't ask to the Roman officer to leave his job. Okay, so we have, I think, by these sentences, beginning of proof of beginning of we can understand that the job of soldier is not a moral problem. Okay, the Christ says also, I have not come to bring peace but a sword. And in another way, I think we have also, when we are Christian, we have also to well understand that the sentence turn your right cheek when you are struck in the left cheek doesn't mean turn the cheek of your neighbor. Okay, and this is very important. Turn your right cheek, it is for you. So okay, but it doesn't mean you turn the cheek of your neighbor, and it is in this way we have to understand moral use of force to protect the neighbor and the justice. The next, please. In the just war theory, I would like to give you some quickly some steps. The first is Saint Ambroise at the 14th century. Saint Ambroise is saying, people being in a position to do so, don't stop an injustice, are as guilty as people committing an injustice. And he adds, the force that protects the country in war is just. Okay? And 1 century after, Saint Augustine precise the thinking of the church, the Catholic Church, and war must remain the last resort. So he doesn't condemn the use of force, but he says war must remain the last resort, and he adds it is more glorious to kill wars with words than men with iron. Okay, so it is not glorifying the war and saying that you can make war for any Christians and so on. No, war cannot be used to settle a dispute, okay? But it remains the last resort. It is very, I think it is very the most important to understand in the theory. And the third step is Saint Thomas Aquinas, okay, at the 13th century, formulates the three conditions of just war very clearly. The next slide, please. Um, in this just war theory, just before to detail the conditions of the just war, I would like to precise and sure to be it's very clear for you that when we speak about the just war, we have the use ad bellum, so the right to make war, and the use in bello, the law of war, and the first is about the political, the government, the prince, and the use in bello is the way of making war, and it is elaborated for the soldiers, the military, the army, and so on. And originally, the two concepts are strongly linked. Okay, there is no difference. You cannot imagine just war with just a cause, for example, but with many variances during the war. So it is not possible. But over the centuries, we assist to a gradual disassociation between the use at bello and use in bello. Okay, use at bello, it is very difficult, very complicated, and it leaves the domain of law. Okay, it is totally different for the use in bello, and this topic will be widely developed in the positive law until the Hague Conventions and the law of armed conflicts we know today, with the principles of discrimination, of proportionality, principle of precaution and prohibition of superfluous harm and unnecessary suffering. But there is a problem because you cannot disassociate the two concepts, both concepts. Okay, so we have now a problem with this theory. The next, please. So the three conditions of the just war, my opinion is that these conditions are today relevant and useful for political, for government, but it is unfortunately forgotten. The first condition is, of course, the legitimate authority. Uh, this is very important. A private person, a firm, okay, an association cannot decide to make war. This is the single legitimate authority is the state, the government. Okay, and why Saint Thomas precise that? Because you know that during the Middle Age, you had a lot of private war between feudals. The second point, this point is very clear to understand. Okay, until today, everybody can understand that the war is a privilege of the state. Okay, the second point is very is more difficult. The just cause. Okay, of course, everybody is when a nation, when a state launches a war against his neighbor, is convinced to make a just war. I remind you Mao Zedong saying that the revolutionary war was a just war. So of course, the understanding of this point is strongly linked to the conception of justice. Okay. In the medieval thought, the notion of guilt is central, but the question is who is empowered to judge of that? And you know that the story of Europe is to not to refuse or to to give to remote the judgment of the Catholic Church and to affirm the sovereignty of the states. It shows that just cause cannot be confused with single material interests of nations, oil, the ethnic reasons, and so on and so on. Okay, and the interest of nation is not sufficient. Okay, there is of course a common good over the nations, and all the popes, and especially P12, have a reminder that the third point is the right intention, and the right intention. We find the notion of war in last resort. This is very important. Uh, you have also this notion of reasonable chance of success. Uh, that is to say that you can be a legitimate authority. Your cause is just, but if you don't have a reasonable chance of success, you have the duty to avoid the war. Okay, and I think it is very important to remember. And of course, the respect of use at the bellum to avoid unnecessary discussions and annihilation of civilian population. The next, please. To conclude, I would like to make a short focus about the nuclear weapons and the Catholic Church, because you in 2017 and in 2019 we have a strong and absolute condemnation of Pope Francis of the nuclear weapons, not only the use but also the possession. And it is a problem for France, for the doctrine of France about the nuclear deterrence. And the problem is still moral to have a nuclear deterrence. Okay, so the next, please. We will try to say if Francis is coherent with the predecessors. The questions. First questions, what would happen in a world where only our adversaries had nuclear weapons? Can we seriously imagine that such a world would be safer and more peaceful? My opinion is that the answer is no. And you have a similarity with pacifism streaming. The weakness cannot be a condition of the peace. That's clear. And this is the reason of the title of my book. If you want peace, prepare for war. Prepare for war, because with when you remember the triple manifestation of evil in the world, you have the duty when you are at the head of a nation. You have the duty to protect your nation. Okay, and so the weakness cannot be a condition of the peace. Second question, is Francis' point of view consistent with that of his predecessors? The answer is more or less. More or less. I give you two examples. The first is the condemnation of the Pope John 23 in his encyclical Pacem in Terris. Justice, wisdom, and a sense of humanity demand the proscription of atomic weapons. Of course, everybody everybody agree with that. In a perfect world, okay, no army, no atomic weapons, etc., etc. But when you try to have a realistic view, the things are different. And I give you this sentence of Pope John Paul II in 1982 to the United Nations, and he said, in the present conditions, I insist on that, deterrence, no, nuclear deterrence based on balance, not as an end in itself, but as a step on the way to progressive disarmament, can still be considered morally acceptable. Okay, so the Pope puts a lot of precautions around that, but it is not an absolute condemnation of the nuclear deterrence or the French nuclear deterrence. But I would like to insist on the link between the possibility to use the nuclear deterrence, but the duty to work to a progressive disarmament. And I think about that, we can say, we can observe today that we are exactly on the way, we are on the contrary way, going to a progression of nuclear weapons in the world. And dear friends, this concludes my short briefing. I am now ready to answer to your questions, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francois. As I said, please put questions in the Q&A, and we'll start with those. As there's none there, I'm going to put you on the hotspot myself a little bit and try and make the debate a little more concrete. Your presentation went through nicely the sort of theory of just war, but if we could then apply it. So a couple of tough areas of application. One would be the growing use of remote weapons, drone weapons in war. So the Russia-Ukraine conflict seems largely or heavily to have been influenced by remote weapons, even on the battlefield. And it's whether they can be used in a just way, in the sense that do soldiers need to be sort of face-to-face, personally engaged to ensure minimum use of violence, protection of civilians and so on? Or is it okay from a just war perspective for a drone operator thousands of miles away on a different continent to be killing targets, sometimes military, sometimes mixed with civilians in them, from a distance? Is that compatible with just war theory?
Yes. Thank you, Paul. You are right. It is a cruel and difficult dilemma for the modern armies committed in this type of remote wars. And just there is no an answer, yes or not. You understand that. I would like to give some elements of thinking, of reflection. The remote war. Um, um, I think the remote war is not a moral evil by itself, by essence. But the difficulty in the modern war is that industrial, energetic infrastructures are both used for civilian population and military assets. It is especially true for for electricity, energy, and the U.S. Air Force. You have the theory of the strategic Second World War, and in this theory, of course, the destruction of the energetic infrastructures are considered as the main target to obtain the collects of the moral of the population. When you are in this intention, if you want to collect and to raise the moral of the population, of course, it is totally immoral, I think. But when when you have to destroy today the organization of the army, it is not only the army, it is the industry and the army. And when you are committed in wars, you cannot also you cannot strike only on the military units. If you let the uh, the industrial tools able to produce armaments, you are sure to lose the war. So you need to conduct a remote war on the industrial capabilities of the enemy to prevent the building of the tanks, artillery, and so on, and also the energetic infrastructure necessary to the industry. So it's very difficult. My opinion is when you target an objective energy central infrastructure or industry directly linked to production of armament. I think it is moral, but saying that after you understand it is the responsibility of the military authority and military political authority making war to decide to decide in their consciousness to do that. So, je n'entends pas.
Sorry, I'm muted. Following on from that, we've got a question in the chat from Christoph, who says, after drones, we seem likely to have robots, artificial intelligence controlled robots. I mean, in some sense, we've got drone ships in the Black Sea at the moment in the Russia-Ukraine war. So we're coming towards autonomous fighting vehicles or possibly machines. Would deployment of those be a problem, according to you? I'll just amplify that a little bit. I understand that it's currently illegal under the Geneva Convention to delegate kill decisions to artificial intelligence weapons. I understand from a military contact of mine that the working assumption is that once a significant conflict breaks out, those checks, those breaks on the use of artificial intelligence to make kill decisions would be removed almost straight away, because the delay would mean you'd lose very quickly. So we're looking at the prospect of a robotized artificial intelligence fought war within the next decade, few years.
Right.
Can that be just in any sense in terms of the fighting of a war?
The main challenges for this for the just war theory and the doctrine, and for the Christians involved in the armies today, the main challenges for me are the following. The first is about the use in bello, okay, the law of war, the law of armed conflicts. The challenge is the robotization of armaments, of weapons, and so the drone, but aerial drones, but also grounds, maritime drones, and you have a big, a great movement to robotize the war and to put off the soldiers out of the combat area. Okay, you understand what I mean? Okay, and of course, it poses many challenges, and the first is the distinction between civilian and between combatants and non-combatants. When with the development of the robotization, how can be sure that a drone, a robot would be able to make difference. So this is the first challenge, and the second challenge is more difficult, according to me, is about the use at bellum and the difficulty to be sure to be yes, to be sure you are committed in a just war. And when you see the potential of disinformation about Ukraine, for example, in the both sides, the Russian side, but also in the Western side, uh, I can tell you it's very difficult to understand where is the truth. uh, and you have this. We are in the era of mass media, of the social network, and this attention, still this hostility between opinion is very strong, and going to this way, we can be involved, I think, in war in the Third World War. It's possible. Huh?
Yeah. We don't have any more questions in the chat. Perhaps I'll ask something else. I mean, in terms of application of your principles to the most directly relevant European example at the moment, Russia-Ukraine. At the beginning, we had Ukrainian Orthodox Church sanctioning Ukrainian defense, whilst the Russian Orthodox Church supported the Russian aggression. How would you sort of go about applying a sort of just war theory to both sides in terms of how can they both justify this conflict?
I would like to remind and precise that the just war theory is a tool, a thinking tool for the making for the governments, for the making decider the yes, for the government. It is difficult when you are an observer to use that to judge. Okay, it's a just war. Ukraine is not, etc., etc. So, but that I can say about the Ukraine conflict. Of course, when you look at the war on the ground, we have seen the Russian tanks crossing the border and invading Ukraine. We agree with that, okay. And if we stay to this level of understanding, we conclude easily, okay, Ukraine is, if you are on the Ukraine side, Ukraine is a just war to protect and defend its territory. Okay, when you try to understand in the other side of the theater, in the story and so on, when you remember the events and the revolution in the Orange Revolution in 2004 and the Maidan Revolution in 2014, and when you have understood all the efforts, political influence, military efforts of the United States, of the NATO, to cut Ukraine from Russia, you understand, right? Yes, you analyze this war in a different way, and when you put the NATO bases going to the east during 30 years close to the border with Russia and so on. And you have to consider all that, and it is more difficult to say, okay, who is the good and where is the bad, okay? And so I think it is the same for the Middle East. It's very, of course, you have the right. Israel is right to protect its people against Islamic terrorism and so on, etc. But the right to protect your population doesn't the right to conduct disproportionate reports. Okay, so
yeah, it's difficult. That was sort of touched on a question from Ruben. Where do we draw the line before launching attacks in war, especially on civilian schools and hospitals? I think we're sort of concluding it's very difficult when militaries or terrorist organizations use those facilities as bases or arms depots or whatever. And it becomes a very difficult grey area to know
yes.
when fighting on the ground what is just and what is gone beyond the pale.
Yes, it's difficult, but this is the reason why we have to insist on the training and the formation about inside the armies, especially in the Western armies, to be sure that the officers who have to take difficult decisions are very well in their mind. It has to be clear that they have the right to do and so on, because very quickly you can take bad decisions by emotion, by hate, by the need to the vengeance and so on. Okay, so.
We've had one more question in from Jacques, talking about the effective proxy war. Well, sorry, not the proxy war, the hybrid warfare, going on at the moment. Some analysts I read say that effectively they call it World War III broke out in 2021, 2022, when Russia, China, and others started conducting sort of attacks on infrastructure, be that undersea cables in the Baltic or in the Arctic. There's obviously cyber attacks going on all the time, which we don't see. So occasionally we see the results of a hack come about. I understand there's quite a lot of activity in space with satellites being blown up deliberately to deny certain satellite tracks with debris and so on. So when and obviously Nord Stream 1 and 2 were blown up, who by, we won't assert on here. But these attacks on infrastructure are seemingly mounting, with particularly undersea cables being cut. The question was, when do these sort of hybrid warfare measures tip over into actual warfare, and when does, in a sense, just war criteria start to apply when we're in these all sorts of grey areas of conflict between geopolitical rivals?
What we have to understand about Russia and China is that at the root of their will of power and increasing their power, at the root there are a strong feeling of humiliation. I don't know the British English term. They want to. They've been humiliated by, their own feeling. Their own feeling is a strong feeling of humiliation by the Western countries. For China, it comes from the Opium War in the 19th century. okay, and for Russia, it is the collapse of the Soviet Union and the feeling to be to be the feeling that the Western this way of Western to go to East and so on, and of course these nations are ready to do all is it possible to do in all domains, especially in the spatial domain, and to destroy satellites and so on, and under submarine and so on and so on. Um, uh, I don't know to answer the question. It is moral to protect ourselves. Okay, I can do that. It is moral to protect our nations, our countries, but we have also the duty, to my opinion, we have also the duty to avoid to provoke the 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 development of the extremism and the potential third world war. And we have the duty to be strong, okay, to prepare the world, but also in a diplomatic way to do all is that possible to to lower the tensions and the level of conflict. But saying that, I know that
Yeah.
it's a good.
I mean, I think some of the principles of just war might apply to if you're conducting a hack to bring down, for instance, the power grid of another country. That may be too far because it will involve civilian deaths in all likelihood, and so it may mean that you need to rein in some of the abilities you may have because of the wider consequences.
I would like to come back on the Ukraine example of Ukraine, because I am according to me, if NATO and the United States says, okay, no NATO force in Ukraine, we developed economic relations in soft power in Ukraine, okay, but we don't put NATO military bases and ballistic missiles and so on close to Russia. I think we will avoid the war. Perhaps I can be wrong, of course, but it is I think we will avoid the war, and it was a mistake to look for the confrontation like that with Russia. But it's just my opinion, and of course I can be wrong.
We've had a comment from Nikos in the Q&A. I'm not sure that it's a question. I might just read it out and see if you want to comment. Eschatologically speaking, that's looking into the end times, pacifism is not a sign of weakness, but a serious choice of dynamic action. The question is whether the church could propose such a position as a universal standard for believers, and furthermore, whether a state could embrace this position in its international relations. Obviously, the answer is no, but again, this no applies only within the scope of human history. I'm not quite sure what that's driving at. I think he's sort of saying that pacifism may be applicable to the church. You could say Jesus' teaching apply on a personal basis as Christians. It's then when should you apply that to wider groups? So even as a head of a household, I might be a pacifist if it came to my danger, but I'll certainly defend my wife and children from an intruder. And so it's sort of, how can the church, Christian individually, sort of perhaps uphold Jesus' teachings about turning the other cheek and so on, whilst combining that with saying to the state there may be legitimate just war reasons why defense is appropriate. And any comments on that balance of the sort of individual non-aggression versus wider society?
I think we have to make this distinction between pacifism and pacification. How to say that? That's sure that according to me that the Catholic Church can say today is that more or less the same that during the last part of the 20th century is that the capacity, the potential of destruction of the modern armaments are so great that war cannot be justified, of course. But you cannot how to say, you cannot prevent people and nations to protect or to try to protect their population. So the Catholic Church has to say that yes, you can't condemn offensive war, for example, trying to conquest territory or resources. That of course that's very clear. It's very difficult to say that you have entered the pacifism streaming or way to avoid and renounce to have an army, for example. But it's a very difficult topic, and I would like that the Catholic Church leaders try to reflect and to produce a thinking more adapted to today, because it's very difficult to find. We have the condemnation of the Pope Francis about the nuclear weapons, but okay, but what do we do with that? It's very difficult. Okay, so the France, I take the example of my country. So the French government should decide to let the nuclear weapons. It would be reasonable. I am not sure, perhaps, but I am not sure.
And the irony is that President Trump a few weeks ago reiterated the ideal of a non-nuclear world, and was sort of opening up to Russia and China to try and further nuclear disarmament in the process. Now, that may be because the US is actually behind in its modernization of its own nuclear weaponry, and so it might be a case of wanting to scrap obsolete weapons, but that's another matter. I think we'll have one more observation or question from Jacques, who was sort of saying, if you're in the Baltics, you're going to be very happy to be part of NATO because you're obviously small and right up against a large and potentially aggressive neighbor. A lot of Eastern European countries applied to join NATO for that reason, from their own free will. And then he says, or is that a completely wrong way to look at the situation in Eastern Europe? I think it's the right way, in the sense that the Baltic states became NATO members because they were concerned about, in a sense, what subsequently happened to Ukraine, that they have Russian-speaking minorities they
but
have been part of the Soviet Union.
I would like to precise that the credibility and the deterrence of NATO, the foundation of the credibility of NATO is the participation of the United States. And if the United States decides to let to leave the NATO, it would be totally different. And I am not sure that NATO or European NATO would be able to do the same job that NATO with the United States. So
yeah. I think, as has been signaled by a number of American presidents, the sort of relative pivoting towards the Pacific has been going on for some time in American thinking. But Europe has been late to get the message in terms of increasing its own defense spending, I think with no more questions coming in, I'll close it there and say thank you very much to Francois for an interesting presentation. I encourage people to go and read his book. There's also an article he's written for us on the Jubilee Centre website recently, and you can re-watch this recording when we post it on the two websites. I'll just publicise another Jubilee Centre webinar coming up in 2 weeks' time on April the 29th. We'll be talking with a barrister in the UK called David McElroy, who has written a recent Cambridge paper on abuse within the evangelical church and why evangelical churches have suffered this, as the Catholic Church has for previous decades. It's now coming to other churches. What we need to do about how we react to allegations of abuse and how to protect against things going forward. So if you'd be interested in that topic, please look out for the link coming around from the Jubilee Centre. That'll be with the Cambridge papers. I'm on the board of the Cambridge papers as well, so I'm double hatting on that one. Okay, thank you very much for participating. Thank you again to Francois for a great discussion.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure for me.
Good night.
Bye-bye.